On behalf of the Board of Directors, myself, administrators, faculty, and students, welcome to Thales Academy, Rolesville. We are glad that you're able to take time to attend this first ever lecture of the Luddy Lecture Series, Lighting the Fire and Educating for Life. The Luddy Lectures are a response to a need for education to directly interact with contemporary society. The goals of education are an increasingly contentious subject in the public square. There's a need to teach cognitive skills while at the same time improving non-cognitive skills so as to compete in a global market with an intelligent and innovative workforce. However, at Thales, we recognize that education is not just about vocational and economic outcomes. It forms individuals by informing their philosophical and ethical conduct that frames their contributions to the larger community. The Luddy Lectures, Lighting the Fire and Educating for Life, will explore the roots, character, and pedagogies of education for the whole student with special reference to the Thales Way. In this series of 4 lectures, one every quarter, invited experts in their respective fields will provide participants some perspectives to consider about education in the 21st century. So to start, it seems altogether appropriate for the lecture's namesake and our founder, Bob Luddy, to begin this dialogue on education. For those who don't know Mr. Luddy's background, let me provide some context. Recognizing the demand for a quality manufacture of commercial kitchen ventilation equipment, Mr. Luddy purchased a sheet metal shop in 1981 and transformed it into CaptiveAire Systems. Today, CaptiveAire employs over 900 employees and over 75 offices nationwide and sales over $300 million in 2014. A strong advocate of quality education, Mr. Luddy establishes schools which help youth develop good character and reasoning skills. In 1998, Mr. Luddy established Franklin Academy, a public charter school in Wake Forest, which now serves over 1,500 K-12 students, and which I had the honor of teaching at for 10 years and being an administrator there. In 2001, Mr. Luddy founded St. Thomas More Academy, a classical college preparatory high school in Raleigh. In 2007, Mr. Luddy opened Thales Academy, a network of private schools offering high-quality education at affordable tuition. Luddy schools are quickly growing, with nearly 3,200 students enrolled throughout the Raleigh area. And to add, Mr. Luddy is an avid supporter of entrepreneurs and the free market system in which his lecture will touch. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Luddy.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here today. Entrepreneurial leadership. The key to success in America has been entrepreneurial leadership. And one of the first things we need to know about leadership is it requires absolute integrity. When I was in high school like you were, I graduated with 350 students, and I was probably the shyest kid of those 350 students. So you're going to have a hard time to believe that now. But it shows over time we grow as individuals. So the focus of this talk is how you grow as students and how we grow as entrepreneurs. And that process never stops throughout your entire life. You know, you hear a lot of technical explanations of entrepreneurism. They're organizers. They combine capital, labor to produce new goods. And we know many famous entrepreneurs and how they've changed the world. But a simple way to think about entrepreneurs and creative people is they create value. And all of us can create value in our lives all the time if we think about it and we focus on it. So that's the core of entrepreneurism, is creating value. And if you think about America and our middle-class lifestyle, we have the most amazing lifestyles that anybody could have ever predicted or thought about throughout the entire history of the world. And then how did that come about? It came about because in America, we are basically free. We all have some restrictions on us. We have laws. We have moral requirements. But we're basically free to think. And when an individual is free to think, their creative energies produce amazing results. If you can witness many problems in America today, and those problems have existed since the beginning of America, and they'll exist long after we're all gone. But we should also focus on the fact that even today in America, you can accomplish virtually anything you want if you work long and hard at it, if you follow the right strictures, and if you develop yourself to be a creative leader and a creative entrepreneur. Adding value is the key. How do you add value? Well, that requires a lot of thought. At Thales, we like to say that we want to provide the highest quality education at the very lowest price. Now, how many of you ever heard that in education before? We hear, if you give us more money, we can do more, and you get what you pay for. So essentially, this is a new concept in education, so much so that we've had any number of national people come in and look at Thales and say, well, it's just impossible to provide high quality at low or affordable cost. And why is that? Because we're stuck in what we like to refer to as conventional wisdom. Now, we all day to day live in conventional wisdom until it changes. But your job as a leader is to relook at conventional wisdom over time and make changes. There was a great North Carolinian, Malcolm McLean. Anybody ever hear of Malcolm McLean? Not very famous, but here's what he did. He had a little trucking company in North Carolina, and he used to drive his trucks down to the port. And he would drive down there and he'd have to wait in line. That would be a long period of time. Then he would have to unload his truck. And then he would drive back, and he said, wow, this is really a very inefficient process. There's got to be a better way to do this. So Malcolm McLean decided what we really should be doing is take the entire truck trailer and just put it on the ship. And so he thought it through, and he eventually pitched it to some financiers in New York, and they decided to try it. And eventually that company became Sealand, and now all shipping worldwide is done based on that concept. If you ever go into these large ports, you'll see these ships, and they'll have these containers, and they'll be stacked very, very high, almost to a point where you think they're going to fall off. Some actually do fall off. Most of them, fortunately, stay on. So here's a gentleman from North Carolina who'd never had a college education. He changed the entire world because he rethought through a process that he realized didn't make a lot of sense. That opportunity is open to every single one of us, but it requires thought, and it requires time and courage. So that's some of the things we'll be talking about today. Entrepreneurs tend to think with a more unique mindset. So most of us, most of the time, accept the status quo. We don't think too much about it. But entrepreneurs tend to look at things a little bit differently. And we want to get some idea or provide some ideas of how they do that and how you can make it work in your life. Most, or at least half of the people in this country are employed by small business. And small business is quite a bit different than large business, and I'll describe that a little bit in this talk today. It requires a higher level of adaptability and flexibility. And those are two keys to entrepreneurial business because it tends to move faster So decisions have to be made more quickly. Individuals have to be more flexible. And we like to say at CaptiveAire, every one of us does dishes and windows. So you'll see our engineers out on the assembly line. They'll go to fix jobs in the field. They'll build their own prototypes. It's a lot different than you think of as traditional engineers. And as a result, they know the nitty-gritty of that product, and that's what helps create continuous improvement. When CaptiveAire began, we were all installers. So every one of us went in the field, we installed, we worked on product. And here, almost 40 years later, we use the information that we learned and the mentality that we developed to develop products that are much more adaptable in the market, much easier to install, easier to service, and lower cost. So how you think will determine your future, because how we think will be how we act. Mises, a great economist, likes to say, we think and then we act. Now, some of us, we all know sometimes we act before we think. Has anybody ever gotten caught into that little problem? It happens to the best of us, okay? So it's very important that you develop your thinking skills, because that's going to determine the future of your life. And the best thinkers are more than likely to be the most successful people. Average thinkers try to avoid problems because it's difficult to confront problems and fix them. It's easier in the short term to avoid a problem. It's harder in the longer term. Entrepreneurial thinkers aggressively solve problems. Average thinkers say they look more toward an average bar. Matter of fact, many people will even state they just desire to be average. Well, that's okay, except there are millions and millions of people in that same category. So if you want to be very successful in life, you're going to have to be above average. And every individual, essentially, or most individuals, have the capability of doing something well above average. There's a book written, it's called Average is Over. And it talks about a macro look at the economy, about people's skills. And you see it played out in the market today, where you have a certain number of people that are doing tremendously well, a large number of people. They're having amazing lives, they're enjoying the American way. And then you have people at the very bottom end that don't have skills for various reasons, and they're struggling in the economy. It's on the news every single day. So it's very important that you develop these skills to the highest level possible. Average thinkers don't think things through very much, so therefore they make many mistakes. Entrepreneurial thinkers think more deeply about subjects and hopefully come up with better answers. Ken Iverson, who was another great North Carolinian and who brought the mini steel mills to the United States today in the form of Nucor steel. Nucor wasn't in the steel business in 1960. U.S. Steel was invincible. Today, Nucor is the largest steel company in the United States. It's almost an unthinkable thing for a staid industry, for a new technology to take over. But Ken Iverson thought differently, he analyzed, and I had an opportunity to spend some time with him. So lesson learned is, anytime you can be around somebody who can teach you something, make sure you learn that lesson. In my case, I got to spend a half a day with Ken Iverson, and never again did I see Ken Iverson except one brief meeting to shake his hand. So when the opportunity is there, take advantage of it, because that opportunity may never occur again. And if you do that, you're going to gain an enormous amount of knowledge that average people aren't going to have because they haven't gone after that knowledge. Many people are risk adverse for various reasons. We tend to get burned a few times and we become more risk adverse. Entrepreneurs learn how to minimize risk. So think of here's something you can understand. When I was young, we were allowed to cross very busy streets at a very young age. But it was drilled into our head that we never crossed the street unless it was with the light or unless there was no cars. And very often we walked with a buddy or a friend and we worked together on it. So at that time, students of your age were very conscious when they were on the road not to walk in front of cars. If you look in modern day, people walk across the street, they don't even look, they assume that the car will stop. Sometimes it doesn't. So that's an example where it's the same risk, but the individual who minimizes that risk can be successful, and somebody who just walks across the street and is not paying any attention might not be so successful. So entrepreneurs will look at risks differently, and they will try to minimize risks. And of course, if they're right, they're successful, and if they're wrong, they will not be successful. So we always want to minimize risk in any undertaking, but we also have to take calculated risks in life to succeed. That's an art form that you have to develop throughout your entire life. It's not going to just happen one day. Small-minded people tend to think the world revolves around them. Entrepreneurs and open-minded people realize that's not so. The world basically is ambivalent about everybody. Everybody's just out doing their thing. They're not paying that much attention to you. So be open to learn constantly. And average thinkers, they're comfortable where they're at. They think things will never change. Entrepreneurial thinkers set the bar high, and then they set it higher, and then they set it higher. One of the questions I get in our company frequently is, why are you setting the bar so high? Because everybody's happy, everybody's comfortable with what we're doing now. And my answer is usually the same. I'm looking down the road 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And if you keep the bar where it's out today, think of where you'll be 15 or 20 years from now. I want to provide some examples of that, a number of examples throughout this talk. So we always have to be setting the bar higher on expectations, what we tend to accomplish. And by doing so, we're always challenged to get better. If you think about companies, if you think about entrepreneurial companies and bureaucratic companies, bureaucracy is a good thing in some ways, and the bureaucracy gets the trains running on time. They get the hamburgers cooked, and they do a good job at it. But over time, they lose growth. The platform begins to age because there's no change, and essentially they become stagnant. I'll give you 5 examples you can relate to. When I was in college, McDonald's produced a 15-cent hamburger. It was pretty darn amazing. So you could get 2 hamburgers for 30 cents, and you could drink some water or a Coke. So for 50 cents, you could have lunch or dinner. Absolutely amazing at that time. And it was fast. It was instant when you went up there. That was in 1960. Now, over time, McDonald's got better and better. They become more bureaucratic. And so we come right up to this point in time. How many places can you go enjoy amazing hamburgers today? Many, many, right? And those hamburgers are more tasty and they're more expensive, but they're more attractive. So people are starting to move toward those more expensive, more tasty hamburgers. So now McDonald's has severe competition because the model they have was great in 1960, is not quite as good in 2010. If you look at Gillette, they basically own the men's shaving business, probably 90% market share. So what do? They'd say, well, we're on top, we'll raise the price, we'll produce a better quality, and we'll raise the price again. Finally, razors became so expensive, they locked them up. You know, you have to get them unlocked to go buy them. And eventually what happens when you have a high price, competition comes along. So now you have Harry's razors, and they say, well, we'll sell you razors for half of what Gillette will sell them for. That's pretty strong competition, isn't it, when you can buy something for half the price? And some modern men today don't shave. So the market begins to dwindle. So what looked like to be invincible 10 years ago, Gillette is now under severe competition. Ditto for Kraft. Kraft dominated the grocery stores. Now they have competition coming from every way that they can think of. IBM was one of the greatest companies of the 20th century. T.J. Watson Sr. managed that company up to about the mid-50s, and he was considered probably the best business entrepreneur of his time. In the mid-50s, he turned it over to his son, and his son decided to risk the entire company in 1960 for the computer age. And he had this dream of a mainframe computer, which was an enormous undertaking for IBM because they didn't have any tradition of being in the computer business. By the mid-60s, IBM was a dominant company in the technology world, absolutely dominant. So T.J. Watson Jr. made that happen. They were so dominant that they talked about the IT industry, computer industry, IBM, and all the rest, because IBM really controlled everything. Most all major companies bought from IBM. Fast forward 50 years later, IBM sales are declining. There's a myriad of entrepreneurs that have come into the marketplace in the last 20 years, and now you have the availability of amazing technology of an iPad that maybe costs $500. It's far superior to any computer that existed in the 1980s or even the 1990s. So now IBM's at the crossroad. They have to make amazing changes or they're not going to exist as a company. General Motors, ditto. In 1970, the Japanese began to send these really small cars to California. And the big three, or big four as it was at the time, in Detroit, they just laughed. They thought the cars were a joke. Nobody would buy those cars, and if a few people did, who cares anyhow? We all know the story. Eventually, the Japanese and the Koreans became stronger and stronger, the Germans. Now we see foreign cars have a very large market share within the US. So what seems like a sure thing today, and in your world it's going to move faster, is going to change very rapidly. Now look at modern companies, and we'll talk about this concept of exit. Exit means you do something entirely different. Think of Uber. They didn't go in and say we're going to change the cab industry. They said we're going to move the marker so far over that nobody can compete with us. So now you have a whole new array of cab drivers using their own cars. Essentially, they've created thousands or millions of entrepreneurs. You have individuals that can do something on their phone. They don't have to worry about tips. And Uber's becoming a major force in the world, and they're also becoming a major force in terms of changing the world by the way we think about things. So cabs had all these strictures. They had to buy expensive medallions from the city. They were under union contracts, all types of restrictions, all gone under Uber. They have really moved the marker in a way that's beyond anything we can think. Facebook didn't really exist hardly 10 years ago. Now Facebook's dominating the world, challenging Google. This is the speed of the modern world. Those individuals in Silicon Valley as a group have a goal to change the entire world and then change it again. We see it with Amazon. If you look at Walmart today, one of the great retailers, or the greatest retailer in the history of the world, Walmart's barely struggling to get a sales gain. And meanwhile, Amazon sales are taking off. Now Amazon has competition online. So this is the nature of the world. I wanted to mention one company that you can relate to, Walt Disney. Walt Disney died 50 years ago. But Disney Company today is still on top because they maintained that creative energy 50 years after the founder was gone. That's an anomaly. It's very unusual, but they made it happen. So these are important lessons in your life. Think about these companies, think about technology, and find your way in the world. Think differently. Exit is innovation. There's a very good video that we can send to you, and it's called Exit. And it's done by a gentleman from the Silicon Valley, and he packs an enormous amount of information, so much so that you have to listen to it several times. So what he says, and this concept is not new, there's been books written about it many years ago, but it's not commonly practiced, or it's not commonly known. So voice is we vote, We protest, we discuss, and maybe we make some headway, but very often we vote for people and then we don't get what we thought we were going to get. Exit creates an entirely new system, an entirely new market. If you relate that to my company, CaptiveAire Systems, when we started in business, many people thought it was laughable that you could never break into kitchen ventilation. It was too well entrenched, there was too many companies. Even people within our own company said, we'll never be able to break out in North Carolina to become a major company. So my message to them was clear. I'll do the leading and the management. You do whatever your job is, you do your job, and we'll work together and we'll get a good outcome. Well, over 40 years, not only did CaptiveAire change the kitchen ventilation world, it's now changing the way HVAC is done, the way buildings are designed. The Thales 612 buildings are controlled by CaptiveAire controls, all these air handlers, through electronic controls, which means in real time we know what every single air handler is doing here, we know what the temperature is in your room, and we know if something goes wrong, we can dispatch somebody to have it fixed. So the world of the future is dramatically different than the past world. And it's very important that we understand it, but also participate in it. Because it's going to be more fun because you have more tools. Think about when I started the company, we didn't have a cell phone, we didn't have an iPad, we didn't have email. So looking back on it, one might say, well, how did you even function? Well, it was a little harder. And it was a little less efficient. Nonetheless, we got it done. So we work with the tools at hand. There's a quote by Charles Schwab, who was the president of Bethlehem Steel, and he said, we work from where we're at with what we have to work with to achieve our goals. It's a very powerful statement. We often hear in the public discourse that I need funding, and I need full funding, and I need resources, and I need. Has anybody ever heard that? We hear it all the time, don't we? My mother and father were good to us, and they would let us do most of the things we wanted to do as long as they were safe and they would have a good outcome. But they never provided any resources because they didn't have any. And so what did that teach us to do? It taught us to be very, very resourceful. And I count resourcefulness as probably the underlying characteristic that moved CaptiveAire to the top, because we learned how to be enormously resourceful under all conditions, and we taught it to a wide range of people. So the guys at Exit, they didn't sit around and worry about the existing laws of how cabs move around or strictures or medallions. They said, we're going to figure out a way to make this amazing. And if anybody's experienced Uber, it's quite an amazing experience where you punch something in on your computer and 4 minutes later somebody picks you up and takes you exactly where you want to go to. It's absolutely amazing. Now that took some pretty good thinking, didn't it? Every one of you is capable of engaging in that type of thinking. You might not do Uber, but you'll do amazing things. Spotify, Airbnb. And these ideas, when you look at them after the fact, they seem very logical. Alfred Land said, if you look at the most complex problem, once solved, the solution looks pretty obvious. It looks almost intuitive. Once solved. It's going to be your job in the future to solve these complex problems with very simple solutions. Does anybody know what Square is? Square is a little device that goes on, so you have a very small vendor, and they can process transactions at high speed at a very low cost. Absolutely amazing technology. So Square empowers all of those small entrepreneurs to be more successful in their business. So what is the thinking process? We're going to talk a little bit about Israel Kirzner. Israel Kirzner was a student of Ludwig von Mises at New York University. And Kirzner would be a genius almost, or probably is a genius, as was Mises. So these are very brilliant thinkers. Kerzner spent his entire life, he's about 85 today, he still writes thinking about the entrepreneurial undertaking. So he writes a rather esoteric book on entrepreneurial thinking, but he hones it down to one word: alertness. Entrepreneurs are alert enough to understand and see things that other people fail to see. Same world, we're looking at the same things. Think of Mr. Malcolm McLean. How many truck drivers drove down over a course of 100 years and put some goods on a ship? Thousands, if not millions, right? But Malcolm McLean said, there's got to be a better way of doing this. Well, what was the starting point? He was alert. He was paying attention to what was going on, and then he was processing that. And he says, there's got to be a better way. Now, I'm sure he didn't figure out Sealand in 5 minutes. I suspect he thought about it for many, many years, because the complexity of going from loading a ship under the old way to the modern way is absolutely enormous. You can picture it in your own mind. But somehow he figured it out, but he also convinced other people to do it. So as an entrepreneur and a leader, we want to acquire knowledge. We want to constantly be taking in knowledge. And one of the problems we have as students, and I had the same problem when I was in high school, just like you, we'll ask the teacher, well, why do I have to learn this? How am I ever going to use this? We tend to be a little pragmatic, don't we? So what I want to say to you is, listen, you need to be fully prepared for days in the future that you cannot anticipate today. And therefore, you have to acquire as much knowledge as you can, and you have to assimilate that knowledge. I like to say, in any given day, in spite of the experience that we've had, in spite of the brilliant, bright people that we have working at CaptiveAire, in any given day, we just barely make it through, and we make it work based on all the combined talents that work on a particular project. So think about if we had 20% less knowledge or 5% less knowledge. My thinking is we wouldn't have done so well that day. So what I want you to think about is 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, will you be prepared for the day when you need that information, when you need that thinking skills, when you need the ability to take risks, when you need to make decisions quickly? In modern companies, many decisions, not all, but many decisions are made in real time. So if you take an entrepreneurial company versus a bureaucratic company, they're going to study, and there's merit to it. They're going to study, they're going to think, they're going to get more information. Entrepreneurs are going to move more intuitively. They're going to take small amounts of information, and they're going to lurch forward. If they make a mistake, they're going to come back and rethink. But overall, they're going to move quickly. So it's very hard for a bureaucratic company to compete with an entrepreneurial company. We experience this all the time. It's the rapidity, it's the rapid-fire decision-making. But that rapid-fire decision-making required 20, 30, 40 years of study and knowledge and thinking, and that's what you have to be engaged in. Now, some decisions where you don't have the right answer can be delayed to the next day. And practice this in your own life. You have a little problem, you don't know how to solve it, you're thinking about it. The next day you wake up and you have a solution. Because your brain has processed that information and is now providing you a good response. So you're going to have to make judgments. Do I need to make a decision instantly? Many of the things that we do require an instantaneous decision or a decision within 30 minutes or an hour. So you have to be prepared for that in the future. So develop your thinking skills in large and in small ways, your decision-making skills, and self-critique. Ken Iverson said that a third of the decisions by the best decisions makers could have been better. He didn't say they were wrong, he said they could have been better. So think about decisions that you make that you could have made a better decision for the purpose of the next time around making a better decision. Did anybody ever go out with a family and order a meal, and then you looked around and somebody else ordered something that you found was more attractive than what I ordered? Okay, it's a little lesson learned. Maybe we didn't think it through enough. Maybe we didn't look at all the options. So develop those thinking skills, which are going to be probably the most important aspect of what you do in terms of your future success and your contribution. We'll talk about 18 keys to success. Stay alert, pay attention. Remember, entrepreneurs are observing and acting on things that other people fail to observe. The same information's in front of all of us. Similar experiences are in front of us. Continuous improvement. Are you getting better every day? Are you staying the same? If you stay the same, by the time you're about age 40, you'll get bored. If you're constantly growing, life is continually getting more exciting, more adventures. You're having more experiences. So this whole idea of continuous improvement is what made the Japanese economy post-World War II. They call it Kaizen. Look for clues. Think of opportunities. You'll never know until you try some things and you engage in experimentation what is possible. Embrace self-learning. Think about this. When you're in school, you largely respond to the teachers, to the curriculum, to what the school wants done. But in addition to that, and that's important, and you need to do that because your academics are your baseline for future decision making. You also need to be a personal self-learner. The University of Tennessee did a study some years ago, and they said, why is it that C students from average colleges sometimes outperform A students from amazing colleges? Didn't seem to make any sense to them. And they came to one conclusion. The difference is those A students were great academic students. They did a terrific job. They learned well. They were proficient. Those C students that ultimately outperformed them were good self-learners, independent learners. I'm going to suggest to you, why not be both? Why not be great at academics and be great as a self-learner? It's going to give you an enormous long-term competitive advantage. And if you're a self-learner, you're going to become more interested in, because you're going to pick out the subjects that interest you. You're going to start developing, become more expert in those areas. So self-learning is very, very critical to the long term. And think about, as the world's changing, you need to have a college education every 4 years, not just the first 4 years that you go to college. The world's changing that quickly, the amount of information that's available. Mentors are very, very important. I've had many great mentors in my life. They've taught me many great lessons in life that I've never forgotten. But we have to seek out those mentors. And when they're in front of us, we have to take advantage of the knowledge that they have. That's a process that you can engage in. And think about, it's gratuitous. If someone gives you a good piece of information, some life wisdom, which they've spent a long time to learn, they're gratuitously handing it over to you. So if someone's going to give you this gift of knowledge, of wisdom, make sure you take advantage of it. It's really important. Because those mentors will help bounce you out. You have your academics, you have your parents, your good family background, your character, but we all need a lot of balancing because we all have rough edges. And very often a mentor will see what those are, they'll see what you're lacking, and they'll get you on the right track. Practice Kaizen, continuous improvement, nonstop, getting better continuously. And I will tell you, even with an entrepreneurial company of 1,000 people, I'm constantly ask the question, isn't what we're doing good enough? And I'll say it's good enough today, it's not going to be good enough in the future. Now, more recently, I've had some of our team email me and said, you always set the bar very, very high for us, but I want to tell you something, you can't set the bar too high for me. And I thought, whoa, we're getting somewhere here. And it's generally true of our team. By setting the bar so outrageously high, we're able to accomplish far more than the average company. And that process never ends. That's the key message. It doesn't matter how old you are. When I was 65, people were asking, well, who's going to run the company? You're 65. Do you evaporate when you're 65? Evidently. I said, well, I'll tell you who's going to run the company. I'm going to run it. Now I'm 70, nobody asks the question. Because we're so in tune, well, if you're 65, you have to retire. There's articles written today that your average working person, you people, you young people, most of you will work to age 70. Some of you will work longer than that. So life changes. We're more healthy today. We have better food. We understand more about our environment. We take better care of our environment. Life changes. We have to change. So this idea of Kaizen is probably one of the critical things that really made CaptiveAire. Lead with integrity and character. Any single day that you watch the news, or any day that you read the newspaper, what are you going to find? You're going to find people that failed, not because they were incompetent, because they lacked integrity, they made a bad decision, they lacked character. So mostly people will fail over these two issues, integrity and character. Now, I will tell you, students, in all cases, you must defend your personal integrity and your character, and it will be under attack your entire life. It's the nature of the world. If you do that successfully, every year that you get older will be more amazing. And you won't have to worry about too much, because you'll have nothing to worry about other than sort of normal living things that we're engaged in. So it's very important that you do the right thing, that you defend your integrity, and don't get in these bad positions that people get into because somehow they lapsed. They weren't thinking, they weren't defending their integrity. People do business with people who have integrity. Would you go down to McDonald's if you thought you might get poisoned if you ate there? You have an absolute belief, if I eat that hamburger, I won't get sick, don't you? And if you had any sense that if you ate that hamburger, you might get sick, you would never go there. So you are very dependent on the people that you work with, people you do business with. Always follow the golden rule. I'm sure your parents have told you that since you were yay high, but I can't stress enough, people will fail because of lack of character integrity. Eliminate ego and embrace humility. Does anybody like anybody that has a big ego? Not too much, right? They're so self-absorbed, we just don't want to be around them. But people who are humble, we like to be around. They're a joy to be around. They do dishes, okay? They wash windows. Nothing's too good for them. So don't get caught in that ego trap. You can have many, many great successes, but success does not always equate to excellence. That's a separate talk. Sometimes we're successful, but we're not excellent. And I know people very often, they're successful and it goes to their head and they have a big ego and they don't realize they're not excellent and it's not going to be sustainable. These are important lessons in life. Never assume you know everything. You should assume you know very little. Because in the big world of knowledge, we all know very, very little. We just know what we know. So there's no reason to get a big ego that I've learned a lot, because no matter how much you've learned, it's not near enough. Maintain a positive attitude. Now, sometimes people will challenge you on this idea of a positive attitude, but do you know anybody with a negative attitude that's successful? I don't know anybody. And it's hard to always have a positive attitude because we're challenged. Sometimes things don't go our way. But the only way out is to have a positive attitude toward the future. It's very, very important. And it's also infectious. Because if we maintain a positive attitude, what are you doing when you maintain a positive attitude? You're leading, okay? You're leading in a correct way. And when you lead, what will happen? People will follow. So you are actually helping to determine the good outcome. So regardless of conditions, regardless of what happens, we maintain a good attitude. Doesn't matter how hard it is. Think of actors and actresses on stage. They might have had a bad day. They might not feel well. They might be tired of acting that day. But when they're on stage, you don't see that, do you? They're projecting the attitude of an actor. I'm going to perform. So when we're out in public, we're all acting to a degree. And that acting should translate into a very positive attitude. It's kind of our stage presence in the world. Very positive attitude, we can get it done. John Kennedy said, life is not fair, so get over it. Don't deal with that. We all have things that don't go our way that we might view as not quite fair. It's the nature of life. Don't worry about it. So lose the victim mentality. There's a comment that I think is one that can carry a long way. Event plus the response equals the outcome, John Maxwell. Now, what is that saying? How you respond will very likely determine the outcome. So you can have two people try the same thing. One of them has a more correct response, they get a better outcome, and the other person doesn't get that outcome. Now, it does something else. If something goes wrong and you blame someone else, you can't control anybody but yourself. So therefore, you're out of control. You can't fix it. But if you respond correctly, you become in control of the situation. You become in control of your own life. It gives you tremendous hope to say, I can make a huge difference in life by my responses in life, how I deal with situations. So it's a very empowering comment. It's terribly empowering. Think about it. You respond correctly, you get a good outcome, consistently. Take responsibility. One of the things that we do with customers, it's typical if you get into a construction, everybody blames everybody else. It's just kind of a normal thing that happens on job sites. We don't do that. We take responsibility. And even if it wasn't our fault, I've developed our people to say, listen, we should have thought this thing through. We should have been more in control of that situation. So we'll take the responsibility and we'll have a good outcome. Well, guess what happens? Those users come back to us again and again and again for one reason. They know we will take responsibility. They know we won't tell them it's somebody else's fault, it's not my fault. If a customer calls and they're disappointed, I always tell them the same thing. I see you're disappointed, we've disappointed you for some reason. Tell us what we need to do to make it right. And usually what happens, somebody will give you some small thing that they want done. Problem solved. And guess what? They're going to come back and buy again because they know that they're going to have a successful outcome. So it's very important that we fix problems. Sometimes we fix problems that are not our own, that we didn't cause them. It really doesn't matter. Our attitude is, if our user has a problem, we have a problem. And we don't want our user to have a problem, so we fix the problem. And it's amazing the results you'll get. Some years ago, I was in Durham, and I was trying to get this company's business, and they had a loyalty to another company. It was just impossible that I could get the business. So one day I was in there, and the guy said, I have this big problem, I have this fire system, we haven't been able to get it fixed. And I said, well, I'll go fix it for you. He says, no, it's not your responsibility, it was someone else. I'm gonna make them fix it. I said, no, would you let me fix it for you? And he says, well, I don't like to do these things, but okay. So I went over and fixed it, called him up when I got back to the office. Remember, no cell phone, no email. Called him up and they said, hey, that problem's fixed. He said, it's fixed? I said, yes, it's all taken care of. He said, well, I've been trying to get this thing fixed for 6 months from the people that did it. Well, from that day forward, I had a loyal customer for life because I fixed a problem that wasn't mine. And it was pretty darn simple, and I did it on my way back to the office. So you see how attitude plays in? It has an enormous impact on people, and those attitudes will remain permanent with these people. Set high goals and determine where you want to go. If you have a goal, for example, and you say that I want to graduate from college in 4 years, you can put up a lot of pain and suffering to reach that goal. But if you say I'm just going to go to college and I'm going to graduate whenever I can, you're going to have a different outcome. And we see a lot of that today. So when you set a goal, you're willing to do a lot of things to reach that goal. and it makes it much easier to reach the goal. So it's very important that we set high goals and we work toward that goal. And then we don't mind doing the things that we have to do. If we don't know where we're headed, then it's going to be hard to endure all the pain because we don't know what the outcome is or where we're going to be. Always look for ways to solve problems. My mother, who's 96, tells us again and again and again, there's a solution to every problem. You just need to go find it. So we're all faced with small problems and large problems, but we have to be problem solvers in our life. How many like to run into people who have nothing but problems? They want to throw their problems on you. There's a lot of people like that. Versus, if someone's a problem solver, you want them on the team, don't you? Because you know you got a good team member that can help out. If someone throws their hands up, they can't solve any problems, you tend to avoid them. So try to learn how to make decisions, how to solve problems, how to grow. And as you solve those small problems, you'll be able to solve larger problems. I like to think of the entrepreneurial experience over 40 or 50 years is we've solved a lot of small problems and larger problems and different type of problems. So no matter what problem comes up to us, we're just ready to solve that problem. If someone new walked in that's not accustomed to solving those problems, everything looks daunting to them. The speed of the number of problems coming at you, the challenges, looks very daunting. But if we're accustomed to doing it, it just looks routine. Learn from your mistakes. What do we hear about history? The lesson from history is we don't learn from history. You've heard that quite often. And we've seen it play out in the 20th century. It's up to you guys to understand history, understand our world, and to not make so many mistakes based on the knowledge you have. And you're going to have an extraordinary amount of knowledge by the time you complete your academic careers. But it's very important that we learn both from what other people did and from ourselves, because just from reading and learning, we can see terrible mistakes that people have made. It helps us resolve, I don't want to make that mistake because I know the price for that mistake is extraordinarily high. So this continuous problem solving, learning from solving those problems, eventually actually becomes fun. Because when you know you can solve problems, you have confidence, and you're going to be more able to solve those problems. Average is over, we talked about. Being comfortable in the modern world is not going to work because the world's more dynamic, it moves quicker. Think about the speed of emails. If you went back in a business person, if they sent 10 letters in a day in 1950, that would be a large number of letters, 10. Most business executives today are sending 150 emails a day, 150, some 200, some 100. So think about the speed of transaction. And the response to those is lightning quick. Sometimes it's seconds or minutes or hours, but it's certainly not days. If someone doesn't respond to an email in a day, you think they must have gone out of town or their computer broke or what have you. So the world is moving rapid fire today, and it's more dynamic, so we have to learn more, we have to be quicker. I like to use this term, be bold, but be right. So we can be bold and cross the street when there's no cars or there's a walk sign because we're right. We don't want to be bold and run across the street when there's cars coming thinking, well, maybe I can dodge the cars. So if we think things through carefully and we know what we're doing, we can make bold moves over time, and those become larger throughout our lifetime. We can do extraordinary things. Overnight success is not realistic. We've heard many stories over the years where individuals say, I want to be an entrepreneur, and by the time I'm 40 years old, I want to retire and never work again. That's about the worst thing I could think of in my lifetime. Because life is a progression. And retirement is not something that we should work toward. It's something that maybe eventually happens. But while we're participating in the world, that's the fun of life. Living life is the fun of life. The French call joie de vie. Enjoy life. So success takes a very long period of time, and virtually anything that you do will take longer and will be more difficult than you anticipated. It's even true of the most experienced leaders. We think we can compress the time down, but there's obstacles in the world, many, many obstacles. But we have to overcome them over time. So nobody is so good or so smart or so lucky that they can do this stuff instantaneously. It's a very long period of time. And one of the most key things in entrepreneurial life and in your own lives is perseverance and determination. Because many times that's all we have, is our own personal perseverance, hard work, determination to succeed. And nobody can take that from you. You own that. You own yourselves. And if you develop that determination and that perseverance, you will be amazed at what you will accomplish in your lifetime. But it's something you have to work on constantly. You never let up. You're always moving forward. You're always persevering. Don't give up on your goals. Very often people have these midlife crises because they gave up on their goal and they realize somehow I didn't achieve the goal that I thought about when I was sitting here in high school. So never ever give up on your goals. If anything, expand upon those goals. It's important to focus over a long period of time. You've heard the term serial entrepreneur, where people say they're involved in all these entrepreneurial businesses. In most businesses today, they're so complex that even after 40 years in kitchen ventilation, we are still learning how to be better 40 years later. So what does that tell you if you were only in the business 5 years? There's no way you could be the best in the world. Because what's happened over 40 years, new technologies have come to bear. The electronic world is now here. The internet is now here. That didn't exist 30 years ago. So now we're able to do things that would be unthinkable even 20 years ago. So if you become specialized in a particular industry and you learn more and more about it, you can move to very, very high levels. So essentially, greatness requires a lifetime of commitment, of practice, of excellence. And it's worth every minute of that time. Time is your most valuable resource. If you make observations both of yourself and other people, you'll find that there's an awful lot of time wasted in life, just an enormous amount of time. So it's very important that you use your time wisely. Embrace cooperation. Cooperation is the key to life. We can disagree about outcomes and where we're going, but we can cooperate how to get there. Be generous. Americans are the most generous people in the world, beyond any. And it shows up in so many ways. You can go to any town, people will help you, they'll be friendly. That's a really nice thing about life. So cooperation is key. We have people we call blockers. They show up in every company, they show up in any environment. And they're going to spend more time trying to block a good outcome than they are to achieve a good outcome. Blockers, we push them out. We want people who cooperate and who work toward great outcomes. Believe in the American dream. It's alive and well. There are challenges. There will always be challenges to the American dream. But you can enjoy those challenges. When I started CaptiveAire, I could not have dreamed where we are today, but the persistence and the longevity and the Kaizen got us there. When Franklin Academy was opened in 1998, a prominent person in Wake Forest told me, nobody will go to your school except maybe a few misfits and malcontents, and there won't be many of those either. And I said, well, thank you very much for coming over today. Have a nice day. And of course, we knew it didn't turn out that way. So the naysayers will always be there. And the reason is because they don't have the vision, they don't have the alertness, they haven't practiced their skills to move to higher levels. So the Luddy schools will present many challenges to you. Curriculum will continually get better. You will be exposed to a wide variety of knowledge and of experiences. So take courage, put everything you have into life and learn how to serve, because the greatest joy in life is not being served, but serving. Practice it a little bit. The more you serve, the happier you'll be. I'll close with Viktor Frankl, and he says, everybody has their own specific vocation or mission in life. Everyone must carry it out on a concrete assignment that demands fulfillment, and he cannot be replaced. So everybody, Frankl says, has a special place in life. You cannot be replaced by anybody else. And as you find that place in life, you're going to find the joy to be of life. You're going to prosper and grow. You're going to be a good influence on your peers, your family, and everybody you're in contact with. And life, yes, will be amazing. Thank you.
If you could just introduce yourself and then the question.
Sure, I'm Frank Commersano. I do work in the construction industry, and I have a 7-year-old boy, Mateo, who's in the Thales Academy in Apex. So back in 1976, with your $1,300 worth of capital, what was your goal with CaptiveAire?
Surprisingly, my initial goal, because I was only one person that didn't have anybody, was initially just to be able to make a living. That was the goal, on the ground. And once I got started, what I found was I was gaining customers at a pretty rapid pace. Almost immediately I said, well, I can do better than that. So over time, those goals ascended, but I didn't start out there. I literally started out to say, I need to make a living, and that's why I'm starting this business.
I'm Judy Cook, and I just want to know why you went ahead and started the Franklin Academy. What inspired you, and what were your initial thoughts and goals?
Well, I'd made observations of the current school system for a number of years. When my children were growing up, the choices were small outside of the public system. And then as they went through school, I met their friends and peers, and I felt like that we were not giving our students the best opportunities that they could enjoy. So for some students in the public system, they do well, but for many students, they don't do so well. And I thought, surely there's got to be a better way that we can serve more students. So my goal was to start a school that would really focus on every student. And every school says this, we worry about all the kids, but they don't do it. I mean, we know that. If they did it, we wouldn't be here today discussing this. So my goal was to focus on every student to get them their highest potential. And everybody's potential is different. So we tend to say, they say that 80% of the kids should go to college. Well, that's really probably not true. I think currently in the US, 25% of the individuals have college degrees. If you go to Switzerland, 70% of the kids don't go to college, they go through apprenticeship programs. So everybody has a different path in life, and I don't want to map that out for them. I want their families and the individuals to map that out because they're best able to determine what it is. But we want to facilitate as wide of experience as they can gain, as much academics as they can take in, so that they can be the best possible person and have every opportunity to do that in life. And that's just not available to too many students in this country today.
Thank you. Any of the students have a question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bryant, and I'm a freshman here at Thales Academy, Roseville. I was wondering how far you were planning on expanding Thales Academy.
Okay, the idea of Thales came at a meeting in 2006 in our corporate office. And that time there was no hope for more charter schools. So about 30 parents came in, somewhere around 6 o'clock at night, and I made a little presentation. And as I recall, we were still talking there at about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and I said, hey guys, I think we should go home to our families. So the idea of Thales evolved between '06 and when we opened in '07 to open a chain of schools that would be a model of the best possible schools, the best possible experience. And then that model would serve as an example. So everything we do is open source. There's no, we'll share it with anybody. Anything that we do is all open source. It's not proprietary. So the real idea was to change the educational system and show that new ideas and new methods can make a big difference. So if you look at direct instruction, it's not a new idea, it's an old idea. Sam Walton said this, I don't have any new ideas, I just take all the old ideas and I make them work. So direct instruction was an old idea, but we learned to be really good practitioners of direct instruction. That sets the baseline for these schools. And then classic curriculum, many people today don't even know what classic curriculum is because the educational system threw it out years ago. So the idea is to be a model, to be the best model, and to continue to grow. Same thing, practice Kaizen, set the bar higher, provide more experiences, and do it at a cost that average people can afford to come to the school. That's the whole idea. So certainly we want to touch everybody that comes to our schools, but we want to touch people well beyond that with the information that we provide. Question?
I'm Micah McKenzie, and I was wondering, you had said how when you first started CaptiveAire, there were people or employees in your company that did not exactly share your vision of getting national, international, and how they thought you would only stay in state. How did you handle those people in that situation?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story because it's usually easy to remember stories. I sent 2 of our salespeople to a national show in Dallas. So they went, and I said, get the state of the art of the industry, let us know if we can compete, tell us the things that we need to do. So they came back and they said, can we meet outside the office? Can we go to lunch? Because we're very concerned about what we saw. And their message was this: you've got about 7 or 8 national competitors. They have great literature, they have outstanding product, they're well entrenched within the industry, they have way more money than you have. You can never compete on a national basis. That's how I listened to them, and maybe I learned this from my dad. I didn't panic about it all. I mean, it's more or less what I expect to hear. So I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You guys go sell, and I'll lead. And that's what happened. And both those guys still work for CaptiveAire, and both of them are tremendously successful. So I didn't react to the world the way they thought I would react. I reacted in a way that I thought was appropriate. It's my job to lead, and I led. There's a question.
Hi, I'm Wendy Mann. I have 2 boys here at Thales. You were talking earlier in your presentation with regard to looking forward and those forward-looking, that vision. What is your vision for this current learning platform in 15, 20 years?
Vision for Thales? Well, one vision is that we will continue to find new and better instructional techniques so that the students can learn more, wider, deeper breadth and depth of their knowledge through new methodology. That's primary. And that we will give them as wide of experience as possible so that it will help them find their mission in life. Every individual, once they eventually discover what they're intended to do, where their skills are, does really well. There's a test that we gave last year. It's called, I believe, U-Science. And we would give this at the end of the junior year. And U-Science determines where your natural skills are. So if I'm a junior in high school and I say I want to be a major league pitcher, probably would have never happened, right? So what this test does, and we did a beta and we'll do a wider beta this year and we'll continue to do it, it helps you understand personally where your skills are, with the idea if you work to your strengths, you will like it more, you will learn quicker, and you'll become more successful. But we also, beyond that, have to give them enough experiences where they can discover, do I want to be in electronics? Do I want to be in medicine? Where's the area that's really going to turn me on, where my skills lie? So we want to continue to expand that year by year.
Hi, my name is Tyrone Pierce, and companies, as they experience momentum and they start to grow, they tend to lose their value and the things that help them get to that point. How do you plan to preserve the philosophy and the culture within the schools as you grow Thales?
That's one of the most challenging problems. And one of the ways is to develop individuals who share that philosophy. So a starting point is this. If you will take note that every leader within Thales was a teacher at Thales. So essentially there was time for them to be vetted, for them to understand if they agreed with this philosophy, and then eventually move into leadership. Were we to go outside and pull somebody in, that's when the trouble begins, because they may have a different philosophy totally, and we see that in organizations all the time. So the primary way would be the same we would do at CaptiveAire, is to develop future leaders who share the similar philosophy and have skills to be able to take the organization within that general philosophy to higher levels. It's very easy for people to get off course if they're not following the right philosophy. So at CaptiveAire, at Thales, we have very well-defined philosophies of what we're trying to do. And those are constant, they should never change. How we go about it and the skills that the individual bring will change. But it is for any organization, it's always a long-term problem. But it's something that we think about constantly, and we will do everything possible to develop the leadership to maintain it. Disney did it over a very long period of time. It is doable, but it's also challenging.
Thank you. Other questions?
There's one over here.
I'm Michael Bono, a senior here, and I was wondering, how has internet accessibility, as it's been increased, and the onset of social media affected entrepreneurialism in the modern age?
Tremendously, because the companies that aren't engaged in the internet and modern technology just can't keep up. One of the things I had on here that I didn't mention, if you looked at most of the companies we competed with back in 1980, except for maybe 3 or 4 national regional companies, none of them exist anymore. They all went out of business because they didn't continue to grow. Today, with the advent of Internet of Things, it's moving so rapidly. We actually have a team of engineers. We have 6 engineers in St. George. That's all they're doing. Then we have a team of IT people, of 25 IT people. That's all they're doing. And pretty much everybody else within the organization is engaged in how are we going to leverage the internet and the modern world to grow. And companies that don't do that, they'll just fade away rather quickly. Because it requires again, this is the adaptability. I mean, companies will say, well, we did fine without technology. Well, that's true, when it didn't exist or wasn't in today's form, but they won't do fine in the future. So those who embrace technology, who understand it, who are adaptable, will be amazing. I mean, if you think about Uber, it's all modern IT technology. That's what it is. It's a piece of technology. So it's something that's always on our mind.
One last question.
I'm Connor Briggs, 11th grade. do you believe apprenticeships will become more common in America in the future?
Yes, well, if you think about this, suppose you go to college for 4 years, and we experience this all the time at CaptiveAire. In your 4th year, you pay some amount of money, $20,000 a year or $50,000 a year. In your 5th year, you go to work and you expect somebody to pay you $50,000 a year. It's a little weird when you think about it. And very often what happens, senior engineers who are 30 years old will say, why did you hire this person? They don't know anything. Well, relative to what they know at 30, no, they don't know so much. So if apprenticeships are able to advance into a modern world, they can be pretty amazing. Because if I wanted to learn how to lay bricks, who would I want to learn it from? A bricklayer, okay? If I wanted to learn about kitchen ventilation, I'd work at CaptiveAire, because we're very advanced. And if you look at these modern industries are moving so rapidly, it's hard for colleges to keep up. Now, what you get in college is you get a baseline so that you're able to learn it. That's really what happens, and that's why an experienced engineer says you don't know much about engineering. Well, you don't, but you have a baseline to learn. So I think we'll see both over time. It depends on how industry and schools work together. I was at Syracuse University about 3 months ago, and we were dealing with the senior engineer for research and development on the environment, and this is the environment inside the building. So they want to know everything that goes in the building. How does it impact your health? How does it impact indoor air quality, comfort, etc.? And they have a whole team of scientists, engineers working together collaboratively, but they also work with companies like us that understand how those technologies will be applied in the field. So this abstract where college is here and the business is here, I think we need to come a little bit closer together. Apprenticeship attempts to do that. So maybe in the future, apprenticeships will be more sophisticated where you actually get a college degree and an apprenticeship, most ideal. We'll just see what develops.
Thank you again, Mr. Lai, for your
Thank you,
words
my
of
pleasure.
wisdom today.